Hello Street Snappers, and welcome to the second edition of my street photography magazine video. In this month's edition we'll be looking at monochrome only cameras, we'll be looking at shooting the streets on film, we will explore some of the common mistakes we all make when making a photo book, we'll also look at my book of the month, I will dissect and critique one of your images, and I'll answer some of your questions. And if that's not enough, we have the first in a series of street photography assignments for you to try. As usual, before we start, a caveat. The views and opinions in this video are my own personal ones, and I know I won't be able to please everyone, so please don't shout at me if you disagree with anything. I always try and say it as it is. Simple as that. Now, I've just got back from a week running workshops in Prague. What a great city for street photography. I've been visiting Prague for about 6 years now, and I know it quite well because my son lived there for about 4 years. But this is my first post-COVID visit. I'll be publishing a zine or a book at some point, but here are a few images from this trip that I shot in the meantime. By the way, most of these are in black and white for a reason. I'm shooting a black and white project in Prague, so this was all done with intent. Okay, before we get into the main content, I really love seeing other photographers' work, and I've just got to show you this, which impressed me on every level. Paul Tracy is an Irish street photographer based in London, and he makes these handmade photo books and prints. This is the 9th in a series called Passerby, and I just love the care and attention and detail in the making of this. I'll pop Paul's details below in the description box so you can have a closer look at his work. It is well worth a look. Let's start by having a look at one of your pictures, and this one is by Kevin Hare, who is a student of mine and a member of the StreetSnappers collective. Now Kevin walked past this bench, he saw the immaculately dressed guy with the red socks, the polished shoes, and the badge gave away the fact that he's probably a military veteran. And the way the scene looked, he thought the two girls were probably in love. Being from a very different age and background, Kevin wondered what the chap was thinking, and he quickly did an about turn to grab a couple of very quick shots. Kevin normally uses a Leica M11 with a 35 lens, but here he had his SL2 with him, which allowed him to shoot at 90mm and therefore get the shot without disturbing the scene. So what do I think of this? Well, I think it's quite a strong frame, and top marks to Kevin for firstly spotting the opportunity and secondly actually executing the shot pretty well. So this is really all about contrast, a useful device in street photography, though maybe some of us rely on it a little too much, maybe, but that's for another conversation. So our attention is drawn initially to the guy with the red socks. He's immaculately turned out, unsurprisingly because he seems to be ex-military. The red socks provide a great focal point because they help transport the eye around the frame. And this is a really useful device for us to deploy. Then we look at the two women who appear to be worlds apart from him in many ways. The bench they're sitting on obviously connects the three figures, but there's a strong disconnect which causes a little bit of tension which makes the frame interesting. So well done, Kevin. This is certainly a keeper, and being ultra generous is a banger. What a great word. I'm going to be wearing my hat back to front before long. By the way, if you're curious about the StreetSnappers collective, this is a group of about 800 people from around the world who have been on one or more of my workshops. It's a great group of street photographers who organise meetups, take part in challenges, collaborate on projects, make books, and much more. Everyone's invited to join, but you do have to come on a workshop first. In the tips and techniques section this month, we're going to be looking at shooting film. So who shoots film? I reckon if I said put your hand up if you regularly shoot film, I guess I'd be looking at about 5% of you, maybe less. But we all know that film's made a big comeback in recent years, in the way that vinyl has done in the music world. And yes, I know it's expensive, but I'm hoping, maybe naively, that the more people who do it, the cheaper it'll become. But despite the cost, there are some clear benefits of shooting film, to me at least. Firstly, there's definitely a film look, and it's something you can't easily replicate in Photoshop. For me, digital is just a little too perfect, and it lacks the soft naturalness of film. Some people call it a vintage look. I think it's just a natural look. But we should also always remember that there are so many variations available with film. All the different film stocks, whether it's black and white or colour, all producing very different looks. And then we've got different ways of treating it in the darkroom. So there is a lot of variety within film. Secondly, and this is the big deal for me, film slows you down and makes you think more. You think more about timing, light, about composition, framing. Every click costs you money, so you work harder at getting it right. But the main thing is, you don't snap first and think later. You think, and then you snap. It's a much more satisfying way of doing things. Thirdly, why use film? Well, I think it's easier to get in the zone and then stay there, because you tend to be more focused on your surroundings and what's happening around you than what's going on with the gear. You're not distracted by buttons, menus, LCD screens. You're there in the moment, focused on what really matters. And finally, I think the journey is just more satisfying. And at risk of sounding like Gwyneth Paltrow, it just feels somehow more organic. And I personally feel much more connected to the world if I'm shooting film. Maybe that's just me, but it works for me. Now, I know some of you will want to know what gear I use for shooting film. And I guess my go-to camera is my trusty Leica M6. This gives me very similar shooting experience and ergonomics to my M10. And it just feels right in the hand. But in reality, film shooting is really about the film stock you use and about the glass on the front of the camera. The camera body is probably the least important part of the process because it's simply a light-proof box. So most cameras, however cheap or expensive, will probably do the job for you. If I'm shooting medium format, which I'll often do for street portraits, I'll probably use a Hasselblad with an 80mm lens, or a very old Mamiya RB67 with a 90mm lens, but this is just so heavy to lug around all day. I don't take this out very often. Film-wise, I usually shoot at 400 ISO. I do like Tri-X for black and white. It has a gritty, contrasty feel. If I'm after something a little softer, I'll use HP5, which I think is less contrasty and maybe has a bit more exposure latitude. But I'm about to experiment with some cheaper emulsion, and I fancy trying Fomopan 400 or Neopan 400. And I'll let you know how I get on with those. If you've tried those, I'd love to know your experiences, so please do pop a comment in the box below. If I'm shooting colour, it's usually Portra 400, maybe Ektachrome, but I don't waver from Portra very much, to be honest. So if you can bear the cost, do give film a go. I think the shooting experience can only make you a better photographer, and it'll certainly teach you to think more about each frame. Now, if you don't know where to start, just have a look at some used gear from a used gear shop on the high street or from eBay, perhaps. Great starting cameras are in plentiful supply, and I'd probably be looking for an SLR from the 70s or 80s. A Nikon F is brilliant. You can get these for 150, 200 quid. Maybe a Nikon FM, Pentax K1000, Olympus OM1, something like that. Or maybe even a little compact, like a Rollei B, which are fabulous. Or a little Olympus Trip. You can probably get these for 50 quid-ish. These are all great cameras for learning how to shoot film. So what am I reading this month? Well, this is a book I've had for a couple of years. The Englishman and the Eel by Stuart Friedman. And it's one I keep coming back to. Okay, it's more documentary than street photography. In fact, it's not really street photography at all. But hey, this channel covers documentary too, so what the heck. This book is all about the venerable but dying institution, the pie and mash shop. And if you're not familiar with them, pie and mash shops were a big thing in London in the last century and have almost completely disappeared. They sell pies and mashed potato with a tasty green liquor and, probably more famously, jellied eels. And that's eels in jelly, if you're not familiar with the concept. I think it's an acquired taste. I've got to say, I'm not a huge fan, but I know lots of people who are. But these shops, these places who sell this, the cafes, they're characterful, they're highly photogenic, they're dogmatically attached to their traditions. Stuart set out to photograph these shops a few years ago, and the resulting book, The Englishman and the Eel, was released following a successful Kickstarter campaign. Published by Dowie Lewis, and I'll put a link to the book below. So why do I like this book? Well, let's start with the photography. Most of this is shot in a documentary, fly-on-the-wall style. And as I said at the outset, it's not street photography, but that doesn't matter. It's all in colour, beautifully produced. It's just a delightful book. One of the great challenges in running a documentary project like this is access. And Stuart's clearly worked hard at being able to get on side with the people he needs to shoot. He'll have made friends with the shop owners, got on side with many of the customers, the people who work in the rooms filleting the fish in the back and making the pies. And I know that Stuart will have done a lot of research before even picking up his camera. And this is an aspect of documentary photography I think a lot of people either overlook or underestimate. To do a project like this, Stuart would have had to become an expert on the pie and mash business. And I think that really shows in the resulting images. But what I really like about this book is the way the images tell a story. Okay, there are some words, there's some useful narrative to back up the images. But they really do work on their own. The pictures provide a strong narrative. The production values of the book are great, as you'd expect from Dowie Lewis. I just love this book. In fact, it's on my recommended reading list when I run documentary workshops. Do have a look. Now, while we're on the subject of books, something a bit different, and I just wanted to talk briefly about producing photography books. This is a subject close to my heart, and I know lots of you will already be making books, but probably more of you want to do it but haven't done it yet. Then, of course, there are zines, similar to books, but more informal, less structured. Producing zines is a big subject on its own, and we'll have a much deeper dive into producing books and particularly zines, in detail in a future edition. But the first point to make here is that a photo book is a great way to bring a project to life, or maybe bring together a tight collection of work as your retrospective or your legacy even. We can easily produce books using the likes of blurb.com or Kiwi, or we can even get them brought to the market by a mainstream publisher. But that's quite difficult, and it's fraught with problems and difficulties. And again, we'll look at this in more detail in a future video. But I see a lot of street photographers who are self-publishing using something like blurb.com. Whether they want one copy of the book or 10 copies or 100 copies. And when they're doing this for the first time, I see people making the same mistakes. And I just thought I'd mention some of these common mistakes so that when you're doing your book, or your first book maybe, you can avoid making them. So I'm really talking about self-publishing here, not going to the likes of Dowie Lewis or Satanta Books and having it professionally published, but doing it yourself using the DIY route. So the mistakes. Firstly, the content. There's a tendency to put pictures into a book which are, shall we say, less than ideal. I get it. You want a nice thick book with 120 pages, but you only have 43 suitable images. So what do? You include too many also rans, the equivalent of your B-roll, pictures that wouldn't otherwise make the grade. And this is a big mistake. because the less good content dilutes the impact of the great content, and you're left with something that's, well, a bit average. But we've all done it. And if you're producing a quantity of books, this can prove to be an expensive mistake. Only include your very best work, and if that means a small book, then so be it. Or if it means taking longer so that you can go out and shoot more images, so be it. The book will be better for it. The second mistake I see is that people get so excited about publishing their book, they rush headlong into it, and they don't give the process enough time. And I completely get it. It's exciting. Why wouldn't you want to see your work in print quickly? But don't do it. When you think you've finished your book, you haven't. You almost certainly will want to change the pictures, the sequence of the pictures, change the text, the typefaces, whatever. When I think I've finished my book, I'll leave it for 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe more. And I know that during that time, the book will improve considerably. So wait. Thirdly, hardly anyone seems to pay enough attention to design. Maybe that's a bit harsh. Too few people pay enough attention to design. You're producing a piece of art. It needs to be artistic, not thrown together using any old page layout or template or any old typeface or some random colour scheme. It needs to look and feel designed. Now, I'm not saying you need to be a designer to do this. You don't. But I guess you could always hire one if you wanted to. But most of us we're photographers, we're artists. We have a good enough creative eye to be able to get this right on our own. Many of the self-publishing platforms will give you a template to design your book, blurb, for example. But do remember, these templates are customizable, and it's nearly always better to tweak them rather than just accept what is put in front of you by the publishing company. So think about the right typeface, the type size, the spacing, the sequencing of the images, the sizing of the images on the page, how much white space to use, whether or not and when to use blank pages. Very powerful in a book. There's a lot to think about, and it does need thinking about. Then there's the cover. According to a recent survey, 79% of people claim that a book's cover influenced their decision to buy it. So yes, most of us do judge a book by its cover. And this is something we need to pay particular attention to when we're designing our photo book. Do we have a picture on the front or just text? Which picture? Which typeface? What colour background? Etc., etc. I see a lot of books that just look a bit homemade, and you wouldn't want to rush out or buy it or read it, or it just doesn't look very interesting. Example, this is my latest zine, which is a bit like a book. It's quite a thick zine. This has just come out, and I am selling them, by the way. So this is all about the essence of Lisbon. But I wanted the cover to be really bright and upbeat with elegant typography. I didn't want to use the usual Times New Roman or Helvetica fonts, which I know would have made life easier, but I think wouldn't have the impact of just doing something a bit more designed. Like all of these things, it's easy to get this wrong, but it's just as easy to get it right. So then you need to think about the visual qualities of a book, also the physical qualities of a book. A big mistake is to skimp on the quality of materials to save a few pounds. Don't do it. Somebody sent me a book recently which had pages of about 90 GSM thickness, and it felt dreadful. It was almost like toilet paper. But I know if she'd upgraded the stock to 170 gram paper, or ideally a bit more, it wouldn't have cost a lot extra, but it would improve the look and the feel of that book no end. So those are just a few pointers for you and some of the common mistakes. As I said, we'll take a closer look at producing books and zines in a future video. But in the meantime, if you can avoid some of these common mistakes, then hopefully at least you're on the right track. Now it's question time. First up, Nigel Hayward asks, how do you feel about photography-based degrees? Are they really worth 9k a year? And do they really help your career? Or would it be worthwhile investing the money in supporting yourself whilst building up a small business and work portfolio? So, are degrees worth the money? Nigel, great question. And the answer is, well, it depends. If you're asking if taking a photography degree later in life will help you in the business of photography, I'd say no, not necessarily. A degree won't teach you business sense. And most degrees only give you a smattering of photographic business skill. But when it comes down to the degree itself, they are all very different. Some degrees are very highly vocational and will teach you about lighting, composition, printing, studio management, and so on, while others are more academic, being much more about concept or art. And which route is right is down to the individual. But I have to say, I have a strong leaning for the latter, which I think will enrich you as a photographer. So going back to your question of, is it worth it? It depends what you want to get out of it. It's a hefty investment. And I think it would be wrong to assume that a degree will provide all the business answers. And it's not necessarily a ticket into a job as an applied photographer. To be honest, the statistics are against you. And I heard recently that only about 20% of students with photography degrees go directly into paid employment as a photographer. But would that stop me? Would I let that stop me? Probably not. I'm very pro degrees, but as I said, the more kind of art-based degree, I think, rather than the vocational degree. Again, that's just me. So another question. This one is from Thomas Scarfstad. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Do you see new or interesting trends in street photography? And if so, which ones? Interesting question, and maybe just a wee bit controversial. And my first reaction to this is, don't get me started. Personally, I try not to take too much notice of trends in street photography, as they tend to be fickle and fairly short-lived. And in fact, to cannibalise a quote from Gerald Ratner, who ran the huge jewellery chain H. Samuels, I think most trends last about as long as a Marks and Spencer's prawn sandwich. Most street photography trends start with Instagrammers or maybe YouTubers. Let's make our pictures green and call them cinematic. I know I've used that phrase before. Let's shoot people close up with a flash, because that's what a certain Leica ambassador does. Let's shoot little silhouettes of people surrounded by big office buildings. We'll shoot from the hip and just take pictures of random strangers. Why don't we overexpose everything and make it look like a faded colour print from 1974? Once one person starts doing this, they get loads of likes, and then everyone follows. Everybody's doing the same stuff. But I think all this is a bit here today, gone tomorrow. And I think we should be finding our own way as street photographers. Yes, taking influences from other people, but not plagiarising their style or their approach. And I really love it when somebody takes the genre off in a slightly different or unexpected direction. So they're starting something rather than following it. And having said all that, one trend that does interest me is the movement towards shooting film more, and we touched on this a few minutes ago, and particularly using large or medium format cameras. Another direction is it a trend? I don't know, but another direction that's good for street photography is the resurgence of black and white as an art form, but only when it's adopted as a deliberate creative choice and not a lazy post-production afterthought. So when it's done kind of deliberately. But again, that's a whole topic on its own, and it's probably one for another day. I'll come back to this in a future video, I think. So, as you know, this is not a gear channel, and we have a little bit of gear talk. And here's a question I know is on a lot of people's lips. Would you buy a monochrome only camera? This is a question I know a lot of people are asking themselves, and they're really struggling to find the right answer. It's a big investment. It has severe limitations. It may mean you need to carry an extra camera around with you. Of course, Leica started all this off with the monochrome M back in, I think, 2012. And they followed it up with some massively capable cameras such as the M11 monochrome, the Q2 monochrome versions. Beautiful. Now Pentax has entered the fray with the full frame K3 Mark III monochrome, which seems to be getting good reviews, and it costs a hell of a lot less than Leica. And then we hear almost daily people pleading with Fujifilm to make a monochrome sensor camera. And I really wish they'd do this. I think it would be an absolute top-selling product. They're not making any noises, but hey, who knows? Never say never. We'll see. So why would you go down this route? You'd have to be very significantly committed to black and white to justify the high costs, certainly in the case of Leicas. I think these cameras really come into their own in low light shooting, where the ISO performance can be significantly better. And I've used the Leica Q2 and Q2 monochrome side by side under normal lighting conditions. And I can honestly say I didn't see much difference between the images. I guess people pixels might see something in it, but I couldn't. So why would I limit myself? I do know people who are committed to black and white, and that's all they shoot. So for them, in their case, I think these cameras would be a great idea and a good investment. But for the rest of us, imagine being out shooting and, you know, maybe even with a black and white project in mind, and you see a shot that you really like, and it would only work in colour. Now, unless you have another camera with you, you're stuffed if you've got a monochrome camera. And that, for me, is the issue with these cameras. They are limiting. Now, I know it's very tempting to dash out and invest in a really specialised bit of kit, but it's not a decision I'd be in a hurry to make, unless money was no object, of course, which, unfortunately, it is. Assignments. This is a new feature for the Street Photography Club, and with each of these magazine editions, I'll be suggesting a street photography mini assignment for you to try, each one designed to flex a specific street photography muscle. These assignments will be linked to the Street Photography Club group on Facebook, which now has over 6,000 members. Please do join, and I'll pop a link below if you're interested. And also the club page on Instagram. And I'll explain all this in a minute, how these platforms will work for this. And over the coming months, I'll be linking these videos more with the Street Photography Club. So please stay tuned for developments. So this month's assignment is all about making connections. This is one of the pillars of street photography, where we put two or more things together in a frame, which on their own wouldn't work, they wouldn't amount to very much. But when you put them together, something happens. And we're looking at a few examples of this now, like the fish having a sniff at the dog's bum, which was shot in Venice, by the way. Or the parking warden putting a ticket on the van that has "Shred It" written all over it. Or the deflated lady next to a sign that says "Ping." Or the absurd bird. Now, the use of signs can be very helpful in making connections with this exercise. And I think it's a great way to train your mind to look for connections. But it can become a bit overdone and a bit cliched. But I think for now, for the purpose of this exercise, making funny connections using signs, I think it's worth a try. Give it a go. And then we have something like a simple visual pun, like here, a fork in the road. So connections, that's your assignment. Take a picture which demonstrates a strong connection. For each assignment, I'll give you a specific Instagram hashtag to use. And the one for this is SPC-connection. SPC connection. If you prefer to post on Facebook, I will start a new thread on the collective Facebook page and I'll pin it to the top. So if you want to just post your image there, that's fine. So just to make it clear, you've got your image, you want to submit it, you can post it either on Instagram using the hashtag or straight into the Facebook group, whichever you prefer. Then, before the next magazine video, I'll select the 12 best images or my 12 favourite images. Then we'll look at them together in a video with a bit of friendly and constructive critique. Again, there's a link to this Facebook group below. Now, if you apply to join the Facebook group, you will be asked a few questions. Please answer them or your application will be declined. We don't filter anybody out on a basis of ability or anything like that, but there are 2 questions that you need to answer. And the questions are to filter out the scammers, basically, because they can't be bothered to answer the questions or they don't know the answers. So please answer the questions. But for these assignments, please do remember that this is all about shooting new material. It's not about posting your old images from your archive. You should be going out there looking for stuff with real intent, connections. So that's almost it for today. What's coming in future videos? Well, with a major Daido Moriyama retrospective hitting London's Photographers Gallery this month, I'll be taking a look at the man and his work, and specifically what we can learn from him and his approach. I'll be making a new updated video about lens choices for street photography, and also coming during the next few months will be a street photographer's guide to shooting in the fabulous city of Lisbon, and lots more. And as always, we will finish these magazine-style videos with a quote. And this one's not from a photographer, but from a writer. And I think we can apply this little bit of philosophy to our street photography. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. And this is from the writer Vivian Green. I'll leave you with that thought. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll be tuning in again soon. Bye for now.